We're going
It's,
live now.
It's all sorts of trouble. So yeah.
So we were
that-
thinking along the same lines in terms of
yeah,
title.
well, yeah, it's a bit creepy, but apparently that's what
It
we were.
must mean that it's the correct title then.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna go ahead and
Uh,
mute the speaker.
Nevertheless, I don't think it's something that only leaders do. I think it's
No, of course, not only leaders do it, but the disturbing thing is when the leaders are doing it and then they're forcing their
no,
policies on
sure,
people. So,
sure,
if people try to play God, but you can avoid and choose not to
Mhm.
deal with them, it's one thing.
Mhm.
But if the leaders are imposing it on you, it's
Mhm.
it's another. So welcome. I don't know. We have one person watching. If
Yeah,
you
that's
can,
you.
is it only me? Do you think that it counts just me? So if anybody's here and you guys can hear us, let us know. Go ahead and type something in the chat. We have
Mhm.
shown up again, second week in a row.
Shoot. No, but so to finish that thought, probably politicians, knowing their general personalities, would be more prone to think they're God, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Yeah.
why a lot of them get into the business of politics in the first place.
All right. No, the thing that got me thinking about that was the decision from the CDC today to recommend the coronavirus vaccine for kids as young as 6 months old. And the idea of recommending this vaccine that has no long-term track record for kids who, I mean, first of all, the whole thing is with any medical intervention, there should be a risk benefit analysis. And for everything that we know, the risk from the coronavirus vaccine is very small for the very young. So for me, when you think of injecting a medical product into somebody, and that medical product does not have a long-term track record, and there's a young developing immune system that's got a pretty good shot at taking a nice whack at the thing, I would much rather see that happen. So I don't see why they are doing this. The only reason I can imagine them doing this that supposedly makes some sort of logical sense, but it's not ethical, is that they are trying to get these vaccines recommended as part of the standard roster of kids vaccines, so that the pharma companies, and I'm not calling them big pharma anymore, I'm calling them crony pharma. So I've got to train myself. That's my new term for them, because big is not the essential. The essential is that they are cronies. And so the crony pharma companies want legal immunity for the damage that they've already done with these vaccines.
And as the emergency immunity, it cannot stand, of course, and as more of the data that's weighted through an ethical character of it will become clearer and clearer once they get it included in the standard package. They would maintain.
The whole point is that there are enough questions about it. We know about the myocarditis part of it. We know that the spike protein itself can do damage, that it can trigger autoimmune reactions. We know that, bypassing all the elements of a kid's innate immune system and injecting the thing right into the kid is going to have a different effect than exposing the kid to a virus and potentially, obviously, be more harmful. The other thing, of course, is whether it is proper to pursue a mass vaccination campaign with a vaccine that is very leaky. Okay. It's not just that it's some of it, very in the middle of a pandemic, which is something that Gerrit Vanden Bossche has discussed a ton of times. So for all of these reasons, I do not see why you are going to subject young kids to a 2 or 3 shot regimen. I mean, there's just the idea of giving a vaccine to a kid that isn't necessary anyway. I mean, kids hate shots. shots. So why are you doing this? Right. So I'm
No,
I'm horrified
I don't-
myself.
I don't think that is the standard either, whether they like it or not, but there's no,
It's relevant. I mean, you're not going to do something to a kid that's painful that isn't necessary.
well,
That's
I
all.
think whether it's necessary or not is, the real
Yeah.
clincher, of course. It's something that is not necessary. It's absurd. It's completely absurd. Yeah, so, of course, then my thoughts inevitably drift to why people would do it in the first place. And then, of course, for the crony pharma parties out there, it's obvious. Yeah. Do you think a lot of parents remain so intimidated that they'll just go along with it?
I mean, I tell you, I go to a pharmacy and I see parents lining up their kids to have these shots. Now, not the really young kids. If I had seen that, I mean, and I guess we're going to see it if we go to a pharmacy in the near future, now that it's recommended by the CDC. It breaks my heart to see these kids, being lined up for this shot. I just couldn't imagine giving a kid this shot. I mean, it's one thing for us to offer ourselves as, experimental.
Guinea pig for
Yeah.
science, sure.
And that was the exact feeling that I had
Mm.
when we were doing it. When we got our 2 shots, I was not at all certain that it was the right thing to do. I said, okay, well, I hope and I think it could be.
Mhm.
And now I just hope it hasn't done any long-term damage, and we'll see how it goes. But the idea of getting it again, I wouldn't get it again. And I certainly wouldn't give it to a kid. So, now you could imagine, say, there's a child whose health is compromised in a certain way, and you would do a lot of study and figure out maybe for a certain child who has certain types of health issues, the cost benefit analysis would be different, right? I could imagine
sure.
that, but the CDC recommendation going across the board for kids is not going to, I think, achieve the goal of having the proper risk benefit analysis be
No,
applied for healthy
No,
kids.
but that's, I guess, also retrospectively, one of the things where they lost me definitively for the narrative is that if you look at adults, so the immunodepressed, of course, and this was clear from the outset, really, we're going to be one of the risk categories. However, it was also clear fairly early that they did not or hardly benefited from the inoculation. So
the cat is playing in the background, guys. If you hear any noise,
Yeah,
it's
well,
the cat.
it's not me, but so that if you transpose that to children, they've been so unforthcoming with the valid argument as to the immunodepressed among the general population. I don't expect them to be any more honest now.
One of the things that I've seen cited in the articles is they say, well, the very young kids, the kids from 6 months to 5 years, that their immune system is responding in the same way as the older kids, and what good news this is. And to me, again, it doesn't matter that you can show that an immune system has responded to a particular vaccine. It's what does that response correspond to in terms of benefits for that individual and risks for that individual, both short-term and long-term. And I don't see it. You can, tell me that a kid's immune system responds well to this vaccine, but it's a spike protein that's different from the variant that's going around as well. I mean, that's a whole nother fact. I just don't understand it at all. The only way it makes any sense in terms of what they think they're achieving is that they think they're going to get this vaccine put on the list of roster, the regular roster for kids, and therefore it's going to be covered by legislation in the United States that will shield these crony pharma companies from liability. That's all I see. Now, you could say that maybe there's some true believers in this, and then I'm going to put it in the category of the leaders playing God, because what happens right now when the CDC authorizes it, government money is going to be spent to subsidize the distribution of the, taxpayer money. And there is no money, right? There's no money. Our economy is in the tank. And so then suddenly they're going to spend millions and millions of dollars. I don't know, is it in the billions of dollars by the time they're doing these vaccines? Maybe. To give this to a whole bunch of kids. With what consequence, I don't know. They are playing God. They are playing roulette. And they are playing roulette in more ways than one, because I don't know how they expect to keep spending money and that somehow the economy is going to remain in anything resembling functionality. I've seen so many warning signs lately. The only positive thing that I've seen economy-wise in the last week was an explanation as to why the mortgage interest rates went down by 1/4 of a percentage point after the Fed increased the base rate by 0.75%. And the way I understood that was that the market had already baked in some
worse news.
some worse news. And so that maybe because they see the Fed taking some sort of measure against inflation, then the market could sort of cool down. But then the latest news I heard after that was that perhaps after that, even there still was not anybody willing to buy the mortgage-backed bonds in the market. And so I think we're still in very bad shape. So, again, for that reason as well, the fact that the CDC is recommending this vaccine that's of dubious value as far as I'm concerned. And then the government is going to be in some places mandating it, in a lot of places, at least subsidizing it and creating this market distortion, pretending this vaccine is more of a value than it is. At least that I don't think we should be happy about in this climate as well. So playing God. So that was what I had in mind with playing God. But what did you have in mind with playing God?
Yeah, I know what it was. It was basically off of what I knew you wanted to talk about, but not solely or not specifically applied to politicians. More generally, that people nowadays, and of course, it's one of my pet peeves. They are, a lot of people basically manifest neurotic behavior, in the sense that we have so much control over what happens that it becomes addictive and a toxic expectation. Once you think you have control over everything, and you can no longer accept, the basics of life, really, and of course it's, we were talking about that the other day, or I guess I gave that example of, the totalitarians of the world, how they would send tons of chemicals into the sky to clear the sky on parade day, right? So, that's a very basic expression of, and then, they can pose as scientific as much as they want, but in the end, the augurs, right? The signs from above, that they have to be good, as if, a bit of rain is this disaster, or even a cloudy sky.
I would take some rain right now. I can tell you that, right? We don't have any rain coming for the next
aside, but,
10 days or so. Let's have some, right?
Anyway, so the sense of or the sense bred by having so much control is, it leads to unhealthy expectation and unhealthy behavior. And so, yeah, that's the sense in which I was thinking about
No, and
playing
see,
God.
that's part of it for me with respect to the, why they would want to do this with the vaccine, right? Because they think that, first of all, this virus is scarier than it actually is. They've been taught by government agencies, by the media, that, basically there's nothing that you can do to strengthen your natural immune system to just work with your body in order to, fight the virus, right? And so that your only solution is some high-tech new, medical intervention that does not have a long track record in this sort of application. And, it's to the point where the media has stirred up in parents the eagerness to subject their kids to it, which I wonder if, the media and the government and everybody hadn't been doing this campaign, whether people would have a more balanced perspective about it.
Well, of course, because, had it been treated like the flu, and then, of course, the flu has devastating effects each and every year too. But
I'd actually be curious, if they track the flu on the New York Times front page,
Well,
the way that they track
of
what
course.
that would actually look like, right? I'd really be curious to see that.
It may happen if this whole climate continues, if they lose, their control of this narrative. Of course, implicit in this whole thing is that we can no longer accept these things from happening, or accept that they are a part of life, and surely, and also the type of solution, I guess, that people expect, because as you rightly noted, one approach is, to strengthen yourself and to strengthen your immune system. Another approach is to push a button and or
Take a
take
pill,
a pill,
right?
and expect everything to be all right. And of course, if that's your expectation, then you're going to be in for a lot of fun, not fun.
Yeah, I would definitely think not. So, we'll see how that plays out, how many parents are actually going to go for it, how many places are actually going to try to mandate it. Because of course, it's really the mandate that's one of the worst problems.
Sure.
There is a problem with the recommendation itself, in the sense that could pave the way towards crony pharma immunity, and it could also pave the way towards the subsidies as well.
Oh, sure.
But it's the mandates, of course, that are the worst, and so we'll have to be watching out for that.
Though, as I told you, I doubt this is in accordance with the Hippocratic Oath, because there's no real reason to give kids extra protection, in view of the almost non-existent lethality for kids. It does negatively affect the natural immune system. So at that point, you're causing damage. And
who, in your view, has given the best argument as to that, the damage to the innate immune system from the vaccine?
Van den Bossche or
Van den Bossche.
Van den Bossche, as some people say. He's been saying that for a long time. He's a brilliant guy, and that at times is hard to keep up with, because there's so much information that you really have to, as a non-expert, really have to unwrap it. But there was a conversation broadcast between him and Brett Weinstein about a week ago, where Weinstein does some of the unwrapping, which is very helpful. And so they, the two of them, they give a fairly complete rundown of the whole situation, and where we are now and where we really shouldn't want to go.
Yeah. So another story that I wanted to talk about, and I'm wondering, I mean, I guess you could say it's playing God in the sense of the leaders wanting to be all knowing. This is something that I came across on Parler just the other day, and I was sharing it. So let me go ahead and find it. Let's see here. Yeah, check out my stuff on Parler, by the way. Oh, and we do have to talk about this new task force that Kamala Harris has as well, because wow, anybody who thinks that this government is not engaged in censorship, trying to do some censorship in a hardcore way, is deceiving themselves. And Kamala Harris is just the latest example. So this was from Zero Hedge just the other day, and the headline is "Data Tracking Technology Used During Pandemic at Risk of Abuse, Australian Privacy Expert Warns." Now, Australia, of course, does not have our Fourth Amendment, but of course, here our Fourth Amendment has a huge hole in it, namely the doctrine that I'll talk about in a minute. But let's see what was going on in Australia. There are media reports in Australia that revealed that Victoria, the state government of Victoria, had been using a data agency, which was initially set up to inform pandemic decision-making, to monitor Victorians' everyday activities beyond COVID-19, right? So,
Precedent was there.
Yeah. So, during the pandemic, we're all locked down. They're using technology. Of course, they were using it in more invasive ways in Australia anyway, to see, for example, whether you carry your phone at a certain radius beyond your home or whatever it was, because you were only allowed to travel a certain amount, et cetera. They did not, as far as I know, use that sort of tracking technology in conjunction with the COVID lockdown requirements here.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Because I have was Canada, I guess they did it there too. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
I don't think they've done that here in US anyway. But they were starting to do things like you could sign up for an app that could tell you whether you were in the proximity of somebody else who had tested positive. And then, of course, the fact that we were all glued to our computers and screens, and we're on Zoom, and we're communicating with everybody electronically for the most part, or on the phone. And those are all communications to which governments around the world can get access one way or another. And so this story is the first confirmation that, surprise, surprise, that the tools that the government had arrogated to itself in, with, saying that they had to because of the pandemic, they're using it now beyond the pandemic to track bulk surveillance of innocent civilians by government using this technology. Now, in the United States, we have the Fourth Amendment, which is supposed to protect you from unreasonable searches and seizures. But unfortunately, even in the United States, there has developed a legal doctrine that ends up creating this huge loophole that has essentially swallowed much of the Fourth Amendment as it would apply practically to people today. And so let me explain to you what I mean. This doctrine is called the third party doctrine. And all it says is that whenever you share information with a third party, which could include Zoom, your social media companies, your internet service providers, your email provider, your bank, your phone company, right? All the, the cell phone location data, maybe the data that is tracking you even on private toll roads or other private places where you're checking in and stuff.
Sure.
There's so many, your Starbucks benefit card or whatever, your frequent coffee drinker card at Starbucks, all of these different things, right? All of this information, when you share it, the third party doctrine says you no longer have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that information. And so the government can get that information from the third party, from your cell phone service provider, from Zoom, from the social media companies, from Starbucks, from, credit card companies, anybody. They can get that information from them without a warrant. The Fourth Amendment no longer applies to any of that information that you share with the so-called third party. That's what the doctrine says. And you could see, especially in an environment where we're locked down in our houses, and the only way we can deal with each other is via services provided by third parties, that you're essentially toast. You have no privacy because this third party doctrine has swallowed the whole Fourth Amendment as applies to you effectively. So, many of you who have been following me for a long time know that I have a solution to this, one that has not been implemented yet. It was in a Law Review article, St. John's Law Review. I published it back in 2014. I'll put it in the descriptive material under here after, we're done, or maybe if I'm really talented, I'll figure out how to get it while Benjamin's talking or something. But the point is that this third party doctrine has been applied to the situation of ordinary people sharing information with a service provider. It's been that way only since the 1970s. And it was an error, I believe, by the Supreme Court to bring it into that context. For decades before that, the only way that they used this doctrine was in a secret agent case. A secret agent case where they were investigating a criminal endeavor. With a criminal endeavor, Tony Soprano making a conspiracy with his, cronies or whatever, with the goons, everything that they're sharing, they're saying, okay, we're going to do this hit, or we're going to do this drug deal. We have the cat still running around the background. So sorry, guys. We're going to do this hit. We're going to do this drug deal. And in addition to, you're going to be at this place at this time, and you're going to have this, and I'm going to do that, and I'll have the getaway car, and whatever arrangements we're making, we also have this arrangement that we're going to keep everything secret. Yeah. But the common law, which is where United States and all the British, countries get their law from, it's common law. The common law says that contract is not enforceable. So if Tony Soprano shares information with his goons, that third party, he has no reasonable expectation of privacy because the contract is illegal, right? But that's not true when I share information with my phone company or with Facebook or with the Zoom or whatever, right? It's just not true. We are law-abiding citizens making legal contracts. And so the third-party doctrine has no place in all of these ordinary business arrangements. And if government is getting this information from these service providers, it needs to get a warrant. The warrant requirement should still apply. And so, we're seeing this creep in Australia. I'm sure some of it's going on here in the United States, and everybody's just too distracted by the gas prices, by the controversy over the drag queens reading at the story time for the kids, and all the parents that are letting their kids hang out with drag queens, and everybody's on one side or the other, and let's all fight about it. People are being distracted from what is really one of the worst things I think that's happened because of the pandemic, maybe worse than the vaccine injuries, which is that we've got Big Brother.
Sure. But yeah. So a question, to what extent do you think this was a case of the inability to foresee the changes that all these new technologies we're going to create, more specifically, before records were, paper, physical records, then all of a sudden, and the 70s, even then, what we call metadata now, would have been, in some type of physical record, right? Paperwork. And then, of course, the fact that it all is literally in the cloud these days, you can imagine that this has been a factor in the proliferation of the doctrine in the first place, right? Because it's, we're not taking it, we're just making a copy or something in that direction.
Sure.
Right?
And I mean, think about it, what was going on then. Now for, banks, it was a bit different, right? Because banks were already keeping a tremendous amount of information about their customers, as they have to, in order to maintain the ledgers for the accounts. But with your phone company, right, there wasn't as much data being collected and retained as part of their ordinary business records. And so you could say that probably the Supreme Court justices did not at that time have an idea of how much information was going to end up being shared with third parties and therefore escaping the protection of the Fourth Amendment's warrant requirement due to the expansion of the third party doctrine here. So, in any event, there is this solution. I am truly hopeful that it can be brought into a case, an appropriate case coming before the court. The last such case was Carpenter v. US in 2018. And unfortunately, there was a nonprofit, legal public interest law firm that had been interested in presenting the theory to the court as part of that case and then backed out at the last minute. And so unfortunately, it was never presented. I actually think that Gorsuch in particular would be quite receptive to it. I think also Thomas would be receptive. It could also be that some of the other justices would be receptive to it as well. You don't really know. I mean, justices that have any sort of an originalist bent to them and who would be sympathetic to the way that Scalia was bringing back a bit more of the Fourth Amendment protections on the grounds of, persons, houses, papers, and effects, protecting those things in addition to a reasonable expectation of privacy. Any justice who's sympathetic to that would, I think, be sympathetic to my argument. So
it's also not something that you can expect from either the legislative or the executive branch, right? It's really a legal way of looking at things because it's about a basic right.
No, and this doctrine, of course, was a creature of the court because they were the ones who were tasked with the application of the Fourth Amendment to particular cases. Is this a search? Is this a seizure within the meaning of the Fourth Amendment? Then if so, you've got to have a warrant based on probable cause, particularized suspicion, stating clearly the places and things to be searched and what's going to be seized, et cetera. So all of that, to have that apply or not apply is a big question, and the courts have been the arbiters of that.
Of course, I can toss you another question, and that's this: shouldn't all companies, basically most service providers, shouldn't they also be a lot more explicit about this legal context and about what protection they're willing to offer their users, their customers? Because right now, people can guess, people can assume, but I don't think they really know what is going to happen. And
I think a lot of people are not aware of this, right? And I have been told by producers that the topic that I just explained to you is too much in the weeds, that it's too technical, that people don't care. But I think if people knew, then they would make different choices,
and they would care more, of course. But how about that? Is that a viable way of improving the situation as well? Because you know, there's got to be service providers who are very much aware of this, but say, you know, people these days, you know, they just send all their information in the cloud. It's pretty
It
metaphorical.
makes it
too,
makes it
right?
very easy, right?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
you know, it's cheap. And rather than, you know, for example, go through and cull old documents and photos and things like that, why not just keep amassing more and more and just back everything up to the cloud, which is the easiest. But the thing that happens is, yes, the government can obtain it without a warrant. And moreover, if they go to your service provider, right? You know, imagine they're not even telling you that they're taking this information and that they're searching it or investigating it. They go to your service provider and grab it and sift through it without your knowledge, right? They do this as well. So they're doing this. You can imagine if you're a service provider and you actually do care about your customers and you care about the issue of privacy, that you would do things like offer encryption.
Sure.
You offer end-to-end encryption for communications. You offer encryption for any cloud backups so that you can say, quite honestly, and you know, it's also better for in terms of privacy vis-a-vis you and your customer. You can say, look, we have no access to your personal data. We actually cannot do it. We have to have, you know, we'd have to have the key to unlock the encryption of your backup or your communications. That is really the most moral way to deal with this today. And, you know, again, you've got some of the politicians, even on the right, who they don't even get it. You know, Ted Cruz, I always thought he was one of the better ones, but he's against encryption.
Yeah, so that's the law enforcement perspective on things,
right?
I guess, you know,
no,
it has life has to be made easier for them, obviously.
Well, and so here's the thing. So I have found that I have run up even, you know, a few legal experts that I have explained this to, people who I respect, because I think it's, well, am I crazy? I've got the solution and people seem not interested. Am I crazy? Is it about? No, they think it makes perfect sense. The solution does make sense. Now, it might not be that you're going to implement my entire conception of privacy, because that would require putting all of privacy's legal protection on the foundation of our property and contract rights. And our legal system is just not set up for that today, because property and contract rights are not properly respected. But what certainly could happen is the Supreme Court could recognize the fact that when this doctrine, this third-party doctrine, was originally formulated and was applied for decades in this way, that the rationale behind it, even though they didn't make it explicit, the rationale behind it implicitly depended upon the common law, this common law of contract, this idea that an illegal contract, a fraudulent contract, it's not enforceable. You know, if I, you know, engage in some sort of fraud and make a contract about it, it doesn't make it legal. It doesn't make it enforceable. So if the justices recognize that, then they could scale back the third-party doctrine to that original scope, knowing that it's this common law basis. And a lot of times they do, they say, yeah, well, we will allow a constitutional doctrine to be informed by common law rationales or roots for it. And so they could do that, and they would not have to apply my whole model at all. They could still keep the third-party doctrine, just scale it back. And this would be the very bright line. It would be a wonderful bright line in order to, you know, get that done. But, you know, when I explain to people, they say, yeah, it does. It makes perfect sense. But I'll tell you why I think there's people on the left and people on the right who don't want to hear about it. The people on the left, why? Because people on the left often don't believe in property and contract rights. And again, you know, acceptance of this would be, you know,
or rather they don't want to accept a valid foundation for it, right? I mean, it's more, we have to weigh the one against the other and.
Well, and that's the thing. So,
endlessly so.
yeah, privacy as a
Mhm.
freestanding right was a creature of legal pragmatism.
Mhm.
It all comes out of that 1890 law review article in the Harvard Law Review, just called Right to Privacy, written by Warren and Brandeis. And in that article, they try to argue as to why property and contract are not enough, and you have to have this freestanding right to privacy.
Mhm.
But conveniently, that right to privacy, as originally proposed and formulated by them, already had baked into it that balancing test. So yes, you have a right to privacy, but it must be balanced against the interests of society. And of course, property and contract rights, even though they've turned into that in a lot of ways,
It's
they weren't baked that way at the beginning, right?
Mhm.
Either it was your property or it wasn't. This is a contract between you and somebody else, a valid contract made freely, or it wasn't. And then certain things flow from that. That foundation never existed for privacy. Privacy from the very beginning was a balancing test. And that's why progressives and leftists love it. And that's why they don't want to hear a property or contract based solution to this, this issue. And then on the right, yeah, it's all about law enforcement, right? Even Greg Gutfeld, who I like in so many ways, I remember him talking about, if you're going to find the needle in the haystack, you have to have the haystack. And that's the rationale for the haystack, which is, of course, all the data collected in bulk surveillance, et cetera. So there's people on the right, people on the left, people on the right, both, who would be reluctant to apply this solution, which I think is an elegant, very common sense solution to a problem. Right. Yeah. And I assume that they could apply something like it in Australia, but Australia doesn't even have anything like our Fourth Amendment for them to fall back on. You would have to go there and actually say, look, people make contracts with these service providers. And while they share information with them, they share it for a very limited purpose, which is to get this service, to communicate with somebody.
Sure.
And that any promise to keep all that private should be enforceable unless the owner of the business is presented with a warrant.
So maybe that's where the private sector, where businesses could play a positive role internationally in offering contracts that are more protective of your rights.
Well, see, that's the thing, right? So the business would have to be willing to challenge when they are being presented, say, with a subpoena, that is
I think
given.
there's a market for that. And, I do not think that's merely theoretic. And of course, in this case, talking about Australia, you can imagine non-Australian business offering a service, and that it would provide them more legal protection than they could get within their own borders. But anyway.
No, I would definitely like to.
My purview.
Oh, well, yeah. So, I mean, this is, that's my non-human baby. And I go back and forth as to whether I'm actually required to write a book about it, but it might be the case that you have to write a book just to get people aware of it these days. I don't know. Anthony over here in the chat is asking a question that goes towards sort of the next topic that I had, right? What are your views of the letter and resulting termination of staff at SpaceX? So I don't know all of the details. What I gather is that there was a letter that was circulated within the employees at SpaceX, but then of course ended up being leaked because everything in the world is leaked these days. Project Veritas makes sure that everything is. I don't know. But the letter was a number of the employees being critical of Elon Musk, and they got fired. Right. And so, there is no right to a job, right? You don't have a right to be employed. So, there are, of course, a number of laws that purport to give you a right to a job. And, maybe after people have been working for SpaceX for a certain amount of time, a law of a particular state, or there's a federal law or whatever that would purport to give them a certain right to a job. Or, a lot of people feel entitled, and you think, okay, well, it's wrong if they're terminated. Most employment properly is at will. Now, to me, it's a separate question whether normatively Elon Musk should fire somebody simply because they are critical of him.
No, but okay, so,
So-
I don't think it was, I don't think that was the particular issue, but like you, I didn't exactly dive into it.
Maybe you know more than I do,
Well,
though.
Well, so at least that's the way I heard it, was that it was basically about HR policy. And so it's one thing, to
Was he
make a-
doing like
make a
the 40
joke-
hours there,
make
or
a
no?
joke about Musk himself, or it's
Let me see if I can get
his
more
particular
details.
traits. The way I understood it was, they were basically extending the whole Twitter discussion, that the hiring wasn't diverse enough, and things in that direction. So, if you really want that type of issue, creating unrest. So, that's the way I understood it, and why he was probably not delighted to have that type of discussion. And,
Okay, here it says the contents were bold. The employees asserted that Musk's behavior in recent weeks had become a source of embarrassment and a distraction for the company. The letter writers offered suggestions for ways that SpaceX could distance itself from Musk's Twitter presence, as well as do better to hold executives and those who commit sexual harassment accountable. So it seemed to have a mixture of them saying that Musk is an embarrassment and that SpaceX should distance themselves from him because of his Twitter behavior.
Okay, so that's rather different from the way I heard it. Well, most of the show.
Yeah. Okay, it says an employee who helped craft the letter but wished to remain anonymous claimed that, quote, a large number of employees across a bunch of demographics and roles and levels helped write the letter. Employees were given the option to sign on to the document, or blah, blah, blah. Okay, I'm not hearing any more details about the content of the letter. So that Musk's behavior, let's see, I don't know, they have that this week in Elon smashing the irony button, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so whatever, they're citing The Verge and all this. So they don't like what he's doing with Twitter, or on Twitter. He's getting a backlash because
Sure,
his
but
politics.
it's politics.
His politics is no. So, here's the thing. Ideally, you have a business workplace where a diversity of opinions is accepted, that people can debate them. At this point, when you talk about a whole bunch of people working for SpaceX who don't respect Musk, and they're doing it because of his politics, that could be an issue in terms of the cohesiveness of the workforce and the ability to achieve the sort of successes that they've achieved going forward, right? Because the whole point is he wants to get to Mars. He thinks it is crucial to keep building this program so that you can get to the moon, then get to Mars, and he's thinks it's going to help save humanity by making us an interplanetary species. We can go into some of this theory a whole other time, right? Because the last bit of the conversation was that the universe is going to have a heat death that being an interplanetary species is not going to save us from anyway, et cetera, right? But ideally, you do allow a variety of opinions and viewpoints, and it's actually even better for you to be challenged by some of your employees in a respectful way, so that you can better your own thinking about stuff, right? This is why you have, but I can see why he would want to, again, I'm not seeing the letter itself, I'm seeing what it's described as, but I could see why he would, want to fire people if he believes that it's so extreme that it would undermine the ability to act cohesively in service of the mission, because he's the one who's dictating what these missions are about and why, and et cetera.
Of course, it is also, I think, the inevitable consequence of, taking public stances, because it's going to provoke reactions among, your own staff as well, without, saying you should deal with it in this way or another. But yeah, he's been in the news a lot, of course.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And, also in this climate where there are a number of layoffs happening, I don't know that SpaceX itself was eager to have a whole bunch of layoffs, but there may have been the thought along those lines, because I know at Tesla, he was doing layoffs. And so if you say, well, who am I going to lay off? People who have no respect for me, as evidenced by them signing on to this letter versus not.
Checking a box, it's obvious.
Yeah, I don't know. There's at a certain point too, if you don't respect your employer, or do you want to work for them? So, yeah, I think it's different. For example, for Twitter, for example, if the employees who are more liberal minded, et cetera, can be tolerant enough to say, okay, I know he wants to come in here and have a free speech, nonpartisan platform, which is not what Twitter has been for a very long time. And they could accept the fact that they're going to be one of many different types of voices that are going to be heard at Twitter going forward, right? You have people who are more left-wing, people who are...
We've got an interesting bot.
Oh, this is nice. Yay, we have a bot. We have our own bot. I think you've arrived when you have a bot, right? Yeah, so let's see here. Let's see if I can, let's see, put user in timeout. I haven't had a bot before, right? Yeah, so I've deleted and put this bot. We had a bot. We've arrived.
Yeah. Congratulations.
Anthony.
This is okay. Anyway.
Anthony, thank you. What do I think of Starship as a business venture? So that's a pretty loaded question, right? I think that there is potential for any of this type of travel as tourism. For me, it seems very far-fetched at this point, given what we know about the moon and Mars and everything, to actually set up whole colonies there. But I am firmly of the belief, and I've seen this in my life, and I'm old enough to have seen, examples of this, that you take one step, and then when you're in the vantage point of that step, then you can see what the next step and what the next step and the next step might be. There are people who might be able to see, many further steps.
Musk is looking at with a long-term perspective.
Yeah. It's interesting though, right? Because right now I've been listening to this book by Neil Oliver, and it's called Wisdom of the Ancients.
Looks in the opposite direction.
Yeah. But, he talks about, an archaeological find where you'll see, for example, the one I was listening to this morning had to do with a man or a woman in a certain place thousands of years ago, knelt down to sharpen a particular spear or other sort of sharp tool or instrument. And the evidence was, that you saw the 2 kneel marks, and you saw, where the knees were, you saw where the toes were behind that. And then you also saw all the little bits of flint that were, arrayed on the ground around it. And he describes, he's a good storyteller, Oliver, as well. So it's fun to listen to this book. It's in his narration and everything. So he talks about the fact that that one moment, which, was a few minutes in a person's life, turns out to be the thing that survives all of these centuries, eons later, that ends up being important or whatever, that none of us really knows what it's going to be. And so, if Musk's goal is, well, he wants to make us an interplanetary species, then you say, okay, well, to what end exactly? Now you could say, yes, you would like to perpetuate humanity as long as possible. I think Friedman and him, the discussion was that at a certain point, the universe is going to suffer a heat death that nobody will survive. But maybe Musk's idea is we're going to get a colony on Mars, and that colony on Mars is going to outlast the Earth, or maybe it's going to set us up to go even further out. Yeah. And so, it's a race against time for the collapse or expansion or whatever it is that's happening in our own solar system that's going to take a very long time. What is the time frame between whatever's going to happen to our own solar system and then the supposed coming heat death of the universe? And is Musk, by taking these steps, going to ensure the future of human flourishing, the possibility of it for thousands of years that wouldn't have existed otherwise? To me, that's not a business venture per se. I wouldn't call it a business venture. I'd call it some sort of a mission. And could you get behind it? As in terms of a business venture, he is paying for some of what he's doing, at least by because I think he's got a lot of investors, right? I don't think that he's running a profit necessarily, but I don't know. I haven't looked into it. But some of it's being paid for by the satellites that he's putting up in the air and the Starlink service that he's providing. What that looks like as a business venture and how much money it pays and whether that's going to end up paying off in the long term, I don't know. But I could see space tourism paying off in the not too distant future. That seems very plausible to me. Again, for me, even just listening to Oliver and him talking about the rocks that are 3.5 billion years old and things like that, it gets you excited to actually see these physical things about our Earth even. And then you can imagine how exciting it would be to actually stand on the moon, be on, right? It doesn't seem like anything that people have allowed themselves to fantasize about for decades. And now we're at the point where people can do that again. And there's value to it. So insofar as tourism and sightseeing and all these things are valuable to human life, that it helps to put our place in the universe in perspective and it's enjoyable, then yeah, I think there's a plausible business venture here. Whether it is one that is, whether there's a bubble in it in terms of there's an investment of resources that isn't justifiable as a business venture right now, I don't know, right? Well, some people invest resources in things that aren't going to see a profit for a very long time. Twitter was one of them, right? As far as I know, Twitter has never, it's never run a profit. And, at what point do you say, okay, well, there's certain things that you do not necessarily for a profit right now, but in the long term, there's certain types of pure mathematics that have turned out to be indispensable for computer science, for example. And they didn't even know at the time that it was going to create that value. Oh, that was nice of you. Yeah, let's give you another timeout. Let's see. Hide user on this channel. I think I did it now. Okay, let's see if I achieve that.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe they're.
We have our own bots.
Come to term with being banned.
Well, speaking of bots, Can I talk about just for a second? Well, I just want to talk about the billboard on Times Square for 1 second.
Oh well. Be my guest.
So I'm not in the marketing department at Parler, so I didn't know that they were doing this, but they actually got some space on a Times Square billboard, and the Parler billboard on Times Square says, hey, Elon, bought a problem, check out Parler.
Mm.
And yeah, so we got our own bots now. Now you were going to say something. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Different topic.
No, well, yeah, if you want, I can give you two. Well, it's a bit far-fetched, the connection with playing God, but.
Well, let me say one more thing on the censorship topic before we go then, and it's just going to be very brief. Kamala Harris has some new task force, and the goal, they say, it's to address certain types of abusive language being spread online. But by address, of course, they mean censor, right? Address. What a word is that, right? But the sorts of communication that they're concerned with is communication that could be described as abusive. That could be all sorts of things. And it's abusive towards either women or believe transgender or other sorts of groups having to do with sexual orientation or sexual identity, sex, etc., gender. I don't know exactly what powers they're arrogating to themselves to address whatever this is, but I think it's going to be more of the same, where they go to the big social media companies and tell them what sorts of posts and language and stuff. Yeah.
For expression is going to be.
Yeah. So, as I said, there's this creep of Big Brother. And, first it was COVID disinformation, and now it's gender disinformation. The thing that was funny was the list of people that they were concerned about being targeted.
Malinformation, right?
Well, yeah, they only went with disinformation this time, but there's mis and mal and dis
of course, because malinformation was information that is true, but in the context, it would be harmful. So of course, if you are prohibiting people from speaking about, biological sex, that must surely be an example of malinformation, because it is a fact based on reality, but for reasons deemed important by the powers that be, you're not supposed to talk about it.
Yeah.
So, no.
Yeah. So, this is a terrible precedent in the sense of giving a vice president a task force to go address certain types of First Amendment protected speech, right? But, I work at Parler, and part of my job is to preserve people's ability to express themselves freely and to express viewpoints and ideas that they have, as long as they are not threatening or inciting violence. And I will continue to do that. So let's have a discussion, Kamala. I'm all ready for that. We can do it, but I'm not changing our policies at Parler in any way, shape, or form because you have a task force, just to let you know. Okay. So you wanted to talk some about the war a bit?
Well, if you have used that title, I may as well present it in those terms. That is playing God, and I'll keep it short because we've been on already for a while. No, so and of course, a proper introduction would take a moment, in the sense that you started discussing the whole situation with approving inoculation with an experimental product for 6-month-olds, etc. So that has been the past 2 years at least have been disheartening and revealing experience for many, and it has also confronted me with the question, who do you trust anymore? And so there are, lots of independent people who try to do fact-based reporting still,
Mhm.
but the bigger news outlets, I guess they are, the new term for it is they're profoundly captured. And of course, they're paid off to
Mhm.
present narrative rather than facts. But the other element you mentioned is distractions, of course, and I wouldn't call the war in Ukraine a distraction, but so how do you
I actually see it as part, right? I see it as part of the whole Big Brother phenomenon, because again, if you go back to
Yeah.
Orwell's 1984, one of the
Sure.
crucial elements of the
Yeah.
recipe
Yeah.
was to have a war, right?
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And I also think that it's probably a good thing that it's also bizarre because whereas let's say the anti-war sentiment traditionally in the U.S. was
On the left,
either with libertarians or on the left, and now you see this turnaround too, and then so in itself,
same with free speech.
in itself, these are interesting times, and it may well be that the outcome will be positive. I think that's also something that we have to allow, because
The outcome of which? The switching, or
the reshifting of opinions, because hopefully many people are at some point or other going to reconsider their opinions, their accepted truths, etc. And of course, the U.S. has intervened internationally where retrospectively they definitely shouldn't have, and that's for two very simple reasons. One, you cannot send your boys and girls to die a senseless death. But also, you cannot export IDs with a gun, right? So, sure, the idea that the more countries adopt, and I won't say democracy, but the rule of law and equity and
some sort of representation, at least.
Sure. We can agree about a lot of those things, but obviously you cannot force people to adopt that. In any case, to make a story that threads to get a whole lot longer than is useful to anyone. I've been displeased with the way that whereas the Soviet Union sort of was the whataboutist solution in any debate for the left, and now Putin is at times plays a similar role for people on the right, and then of course Russian propaganda, which is able. They've fed all these theories about biolabs, etc.
Right.
Ukraine is corrupt.
Nazis.
Yeah, I know Ukraine is corrupt, but what do you think about Russia? In any case, so these two tidbits, I thought are typical examples of Putin playing God. So the one is, and it has been reported in many media here in front of me. I reported on June 10th in the New York Post. So if you're saying I'm using lefty sources, but so this was in a speech for national Russian consumption, and so all the overt, the alleged motives for invading Ukraine were the objectives, the denazification, demilitarization. Was there another one?
Protect the
Yeah, okay,
people
the Russian speakers.
Right.
So, of course, now he has spoken to his own people, to the subordinates, to the slaves, and he has been very straightforward. He, of course, compared himself to Tsar Peter I, who supposedly, in his revisionist view of history, expanded elsewhere and to enforce claims by way of Slavic people here and there, etc. So that is what he has declared officially that they're doing. So they want to expand and consolidate. So
So now the whole rationale for the war is to actually take over Ukraine completely, absorb it. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and presumably not only Ukraine, and so this is something that he has been explicit about for much longer. In his view, the disintegration of the Soviet Union.
Let me grab this.
Of the Soviet Union was
my piece of the Berlin Wall.
The greatest disaster of modern history, and of course, so I think this is the easier way to look at it. For since Yeltsin, arguably since Gorbachev, what one should have wondered is this stage of Russian history. So is it a continuation of the one or of the other? And retrospectively, I think what you can say is that possibly the Yeltsin era, which was pretty short, was an interruption of a much longer totalitarian tradition. And first it was the Tsars, then it was the Soviet Union, and then it was Putin. And of course, the tragedy Putin refers to is the fact that due to their on paper redivision and republics, they set themselves up for disintegration of their empire. But the empirical ambition has not changed, and it's official. So let's not keep ourselves
in the dark about it.
In the dark about it.
So that if you capitulate to him, then basically you are giving him the go ahead to continue along that path, right? Is that the idea?
Hopefully he's as sick as people claim him or suspect him to be, and that would of course explain why they're attacking with this level of desperation, because they lost over 30,000 troops in 115 days. So,
Anthony, thank you here for this. You ask about Victor David Hansen, and no, I have not met him. I do know people who know him, and I've actually thought a lot about meeting him. And I was going to tell you, I saw something that he posted on Parler just a little while ago that I ended up finding quite interesting. It actually happens to be at the top of the Discover page right now. So I would go check it out if I were you. It's at victorhansen.com. And I want to go check it out. But anyway, this is it. He says, we all know the Democrats have nothing going for them in November 2022. So they are inciting people with their January 6th hearings. It is an abomination of a true democratic deliberation, which should have been bipartisan, so all voices were heard and the problem seriously addressed. It is a show trial as it is, read about it. So you do want to go check out his analysis of this great, just disgraceful hearing that's been going on this week on top of all the other stuff. But, there was no, as far as I understand it, there's no participating active minority member of this committee. It's just completely ruled by Democrats. And then they hired this ABC media producer. So they actually produced it as propaganda. It's crazy.
I think that always also was a mistake of the Republicans, because they refused to sit on the committee. I imagine, and I'm not saying that this might have happened, but a condition could have been to address all these things. Personally, I would have liked to know how it was possible that these people just were able to walk through.
Yeah. Another one who another one who posts on Parler, who does a lot of good stuff, is John Solomon. And one of the things that he posted today is, again, raising this question, how it's very clear that the Capitol Police were not doing their job that day. And, again, remember, it was recently covered on MSNBC. Okay, guys, on MSNBC, they were covering the story. There was a report out of, the government GAO talking about, Victor Davis Hanson, exactly. Out of the GAO, there was this report talking about the fact that Facebook and Parler referred public posts that were inciting or threatening violence on the 6th to the authorities, and that the authorities didn't do anything in reaction to those reports. So I think the biggest story that hasn't been covered at all by that committee is that they could have done things to prevent that. And then, as I understand, again, I've only seen headlines about this, I haven't looked into it. Colbert was involved with some people who got into the Capitol and made a breach somewhere in there where they shouldn't have been allowed. And, again, have they not learned their lesson? Apparently it showed that the Capitol Police were not doing their job in a certain way. And of course, there's disparate treatment if you're breaching the Capitol and you're with Stephen Colbert versus you're a Trump supporter, but that, is a different story for another day. Right. So, he says, that John Wayne, I have no doubts that the Democrat are making a show trial of this, but January 6th is still not something that can be brushed aside when it goes to demonstrating the lack of Republican principles. Certainly there should not have been violence incited that day. And certainly when the law enforcement got the referrals about the threat of something happening that day at the Capitol, they should have been far better prepared than they were, and then it wouldn't have happened. There's tons of footage of these people just being allowed to walk in. And why did that happen? We don't know.
I would like to know.
Exactly.
Because it leaves some of us with the impression that that it's a trophy for people like Pelosi, right? Now they're survivors of the insurrection, and it is my understanding that she's responsible for the Capitol Police, right? So it makes it
really ridiculous.
Makes it ridiculous, and show trial that will not bring us closer to the truth.
No.
Anyway.
So you had one more sense in which,
so
like a playing God example, or?
Well, yes. I guess so. And this is a smaller story, but it also relates to Russia. And I thought it was remarkable, and it shows you the mindset of certain systems. So we've all heard about sleeper agents, right? And what they do, and typically it requires a huge investment because it takes time for somebody to establish him or herself as a sleeper. And, you know, there have been cases here in the US from people, on the one hand, of course, getting very comfy because they lead these easy sponsored lives, right?
Mhm.
And in this case, I found it remarkable, and it was a Russian sleeper agent who, after living incognito as a Brazilian for 12 years,
Hmm.
during which period he also lived and studied in the US, Johns Hopkins.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so he was also, you know, very close to the center of power. So, you know, that's another interesting
Hmm.
perspective. God knows what information he collected in the meantime. But and we don't know how they found him out, though there was a news source and a quote unquote independent news source that verified the story, and they were able to confirm it with through the simple application of facial recognition software.
Wow.
So here's the thing: he had applied for an internship with the International Criminal Court in The Hague, and they discovered that this Brazilian gentleman was actually GRU, so Russian military intelligence sleeper. So I think that's also worthwhile to consider, you know, the long-term perspective. Of course, when we are in this hectic environment of you know, running after silly news story to silly news story. Yeah, it's also easy to forget that there are malevolent forces too that take, you know, the long perspective, and they, you know, they just plant dozens of people around the world. And so
Ready to
yeah,
activate them at a particular
at a
time.
particular
Yeah.
time. So he didn't succeed, but yeah. So apparently, it was easy to confirm the story just by using facial recognition software. So anyway.
Anthony asks, are we living through the end of an era where the individual is respected? Says at the moment it is looking like that. I think in a lot of circles, they are trying to make it be that way. But at the same time, I think that there is a very healthy rebellion in the other direction. And I see so much of this at Parler. The fact that Parler as an entity has revived itself, that it's a viable business that is going strong, that has, you know, a board that believes in it and everything. During this economy and everything else, we're hiring. I mean, to me, you know, again, I work there, so I'm biased, of course, and I've worked there for just about 2 years now. But, you know, we have our mission, which is, you know, and to me, it is, as much as Elon Musk might take over Twitter and then become a competitor that's going to be a threat to Parler, maybe in this sphere, who knows? But I see it as very heartening.
Mainstream, right?
Well, and that's the whole thing. The fact that people have reacted so positively to Musk wanting to push Twitter in this direction of allowing free and open inquiry, the fact that you know, Musk seems to be somebody who's thinking for himself, that used to be a Democratic voter that is leaning towards not Trump, but DeSantis, right? DeSantis, who I don't necessarily agree with about everything, but I do agree with him about a lot of things. And I see him as a very competent and level-headed executive, you know, in terms of executive branch of government. There are reasons to be optimistic about the direction that certain things are going in. At the same time, of course, you know, there's no way that you can just sit back and, you know, just let things happen either. I think all of us need to be awake as I think Jordan
Wake,
Peterson
yeah.
would talk about, right? He'd
Yeah.
always say, kind of wake up and always be looking
Oh, yeah.
and
Wake and speak the truth. right?
speak the truth
Yeah.
and be active and
Yeah.
just keep going. There is a small but viable and energetic and enthusiastic minority of people who I think whose
well-
heart is in the right place. And they're all finding each other. I mean, you've got
Mhm,
Bill Maher and Neil Oliver and Brett
Mhm.
Weinstein,
mhm.
all these
Yeah,
very
and-
thoughtful people who are, their heart is in the right place. I don't think it's right to make them anything that they're not. I mean, you've got Nadine Strossen,
Mhm.
she's self-declared Democrat as well, former president of ACLU, and she's just out there going gangbusters for free expression.
Mhm.
So no, there's so many good people. Barry Weiss, doing a lot of
Sure.
great work.
Mhm.
Glenn Greenwald,
Mhm.
right? There's a lot to be thankful and optimistic for, I think, out there in the intellectual world. And
Yeah,
I-
and sometimes it's also restricted more to a particular field where people are rather level-headed and individualist and so on and so forth.
Yeah. no, but I do. I
of
think
course,
try to make sure we have fair elections this fall, right? There are a
Step
number
one,
of
yeah.
and I don't know, the 2000 Mules movie, does it actually prove anything? No, it raises certain questions that I think at least
Mhm.
would be worthy of investigation about the
Mhm.
mules, based on what I understand of the technology and stuff that and
Mhm.
what it shows. Everybody could volunteer to help ensure that the elections this fall are fair.
Mhm.
Republicans are not perfect, but I do think that it would be better at this point in time to see a shift so that the Republicans have a majority in at least one
Yeah.
of the legislative
Yeah,
bodies
no, but,
nationally,
of
right?
course,
Yeah.
the checks and balances mean that
Team gridlock, people.
yeah,
Team gridlock.
that ideally,
Stop this
they,
mess. Yeah.
At least they cannot mess up more than
Yeah.
in a certain degree.
Maybe
Oh,
2024 DeSantis,
yeah. I think we should tell them about the mirror.
the mirror.
Because people are going to be confused because so we're recording this in front of a mirror, so that's why we're the other way around.
Not true. Just, mix it up a little, right? Mix it up a little. It is sort of like looking in a mirror when you're looking at yourself in a Zoom, but yeah. Anyway, well, thank you, everybody. I'm sure that we spoke longer than we intended to, again, as we did last week as well. We'll try to be more concise, but on these Saturdays, I can't really promise anything. So thank you for whoever tuned in live, and Anthony and others for your super chat. We appreciate that always.
And thanks to the bot, it's, sort of a blessing in disguise.